We are starting the 10th session of our Hilchot Shabbat, following the Shulchan Aruch, chapters 253 and on. Yesterday we spoke about timers, and some people asked the question whether you're allowed to restart a timer on Shabbat, meaning do you have to schedule it only for one time to turn off, or could you turn it off and turn it on again? The answer is whatever you schedule before Shabbat is good. It works. You could do multiple times. You could have it turn on and off every half hour as long as you schedule it before Shabbat. And another question is, are you allowed to manipulate the timer after Shabbat started? When it's an on-off position, could you move the pegs? Now, we're not talking about a digital one or an electric one. We're talking about the traditional mechanical timer that has pegs. You could move the pegs or pull in and push in the pegs in the and in the timer. It's all mechanical. So technically, you could do that. The question came up in halachic literature, actually not about timers, but about a case of a blackout. The question was asked when there is a blackout, and now there's no electric power anywhere in the house. Are you allowed to change the position of switches from on to off? And the answer was that, again, technically you could do it. With blackout, since it's a random thing, doesn't happen very often, depends on where you live. We don't have the concern that would alter the nature of Shabbat. And remember, we are talking about all this before we really launched a deep investigation into what is the nature of electricity and how is it on Shabbat. Now we assume that, as we know, that there is a debate between the poskim. Some say it's a biblical prohibition, some say it's a rabbinical prohibition. The evidence tilts towards those who say it's a rabbinical prohibition. Of course, rabbinical, we're talking about later generations, and more of a fence and a restriction that was put on Shabbat in order to prevent the erosion of the character of Shabbat. So, in the same manner that there was those who said that you could alter the position of a switch on Shabbat in case of a blackout, the same thing would apply to a timer if necessary. After the timer has turned off the device, appliance, or light that it is connected to, you could alter it, make it reactivate earlier or later, because there's no direct action. It's not even a gerama. It's not the same as things that is mentioned halakha, taking oil from a candle while it's burning, letting it drip an oil candle into a plate, because in that case you are diminishing immediately the length of the candle's life. But here it is different. So, if necessary, one could do that. And again, always have in mind how do we want to preserve and maintain the nature of Shabbat. So the following chapters in Shulchan Aruch speak about the issue of shehiyah v'hatmana, which causes major problems to many chefs and housewives and men who cook like me around the world, because the common wisdom, or that is how people are being taught in schools, in yeshivot, in midrashot. What they're being taught is that the issue is so complicated that the only safe way to leave food on the hot plate before Shabbat is to have it fully cooked, leave it there, don't touch it. Now, this is not exactly what the halacha says, and there are other ways around it, and it's not that complicated. As long as one knows the basic rules and the definitions around shehiyah v'hatmana, which literally means, shehiyah means leaving food on the hot plate or on a stove before Shabbat. Hatmana means covering a pot or a dish, wrapping it completely, but not putting it on the fire. And then there's a concept of hazara, which will be discussed later in Siman Shin Het, that is returning food to the hot plate on Shabbat, well, we could discuss it here. So first, let's speak about the definitions of the terms that are being used in the rabbinical sources. So we have the Mishnah speaks about different types of stoves: tanur, kiraim, kupah. The ovens or stoves people used at the time of the Talmud are not what we use today. They were basically an upside down wok, a big bowl of clay with an opening in the side. You can imagine like a small igloo, right? You would put coal underneath, and the outer surface would heat up. Sometimes that was for baking, and if it was for cooking, there would be an opening on the top where you would place the pot. When you put out the coals, there's still heat, but if you want to make sure that the fire dies out completely with the coals, you would spread ashes on top. So those three types of stoves, tanur, kiraim, kupah, each one of them is a little bigger than the other. The kupah is small, kiraim is a medium-sized, tanur is the biggest, and the application of what size it is how much heat those are going to preserve. Anyway, we're not using those today, so we'll have to talk about what we have. The two terms that the Mishnah uses regarding the status of those stoves before Shabbat are grufa uktuma. Ligrof means to sweep or to move aside, and that means that within those different types of stoves, you move the coals to one side of the stove. Now that doesn't change the heat level within the stove, but it serves as a reminder to you that now you're on Shabbat mode. And that is an important element to remember, that we are, when we talk about the laws of Shabbat, there are laws that have to do with what you do, and there are laws that have to do with the perception of what you do. And that perception could be your perception or someone else's perception. And especially regarding mevashel, regarding cooking, there is an important distinction to be made here, which we'll make soon. So this one level is gufa, the other one is ktuma. Ktuma with kuf and tet, ketuma in the correct pronunciation. Ketuma comes from the word qitma in Aramaic, which means ashes. That's when you spread ashes on top of the coals. So not only you made for yourself a reminder that you're in Shabbat mode, the fire is going to die out slowly. So when it comes to the issue of leaving food on the stove before Shabbat, what is the concern? There is a dispute in the Mishnah between the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel, and it's discussed in depth in the third chapter of Masechet Shabbat. It's called Perek Kira. It's quite confusing. The basic argument is this. Our fear is that if you put food on the stove before Shabbat, and it's not fully cooked by the time dinner arrives, you are going to stoke the fire. And by doing so, you will either be transgressing the prohibition of mevashel, of cooking, or the prohibition of starting a fire or feeding a fire. The solution for that is to move the coals to one side and put ashes on them, and now you have a reminder. You know that you're not going to stoke the fire. There's another way to assure that you're not going to stoke the fire, and that is if you put food that is fully cooked on the fire, and then here comes into the picture the term known as mitztamek ve'afelo, mitztamek ve'ralo. This dish that you just put there, if you know that the extensive cooking is going to diminish its quality, then you're not going to stoke the fire because it would be counterintuitive. Similarly, if the dish is uncooked, is completely raw, then no matter what you do, it wouldn't be ready for the night's meal. Again, there's no concern about you stoking the fire, because no matter what you do, you wouldn't have it ready for the night. It will be only ready the next day. So to put something that's completely raw on the hot plate before Shabbat is not a problem, or even if you put something that is half cooked and you add something raw to it, like a piece of meat that is uncooked, then it is as if you pushed it aside from your awareness, you're not thinking about this, and there would be no problem. However, all these distinctions and all these discussions only apply to what we call esh megula, an open fire. Esh mechusa, if it's covered fire, where there is no fear that you're going to somehow manipulate the fire or the stove or stoke the fire, then all of these things are not a concern. So, when it comes to our day and time, there is a difference between a hot plate, which you plug in and cannot be manipulated. The Israeli famous plata, right? Plata shel Shabbat, the hot plate, doesn't have any knobs, doesn't have any different levels. Just plug it in, plug it out. It's on and off. Therefore, once you put it in, you already know you're on Shabbat mode, because it's called plata shel Shabbat. There's nothing you can do to alter the speed of cooking, except for moving the food around to an area which is hotter than the rest of the hot plate. If you want to be extra cautious, which some people recommend, you could cover the hot plate with aluminum foil, but that is not necessary. Now, the confusion, I believe, that started in America with what is called the blech, the hot plate, is that people would, and people still do, would put a sheet of metal, which they call the blech, over the stove, the gas stove. So you could see the gas burning, and that for people was considered an open fire, right? Esh megula, not esh mechusa, not covered fire, uncovered fire, and therefore all the concerns about changing the temperature or playing with manipulating the temperature came into place. There's a simple solution to that, and that is either removing the knobs from the stove, which was something that we could have done. We could do easily when I was growing up. I think that today it's a little more difficult to remove the knobs from a gas stove, especially if you have something like Wolf or one of these really good quality stoves. So the other solution is to cover the knobs with aluminum foil. That is the reminder for you that you cannot touch it. So whatever you put on that hot plate, on that blech before Shabbat, whether it's plugged, it's the electric hot plate that is plugged and has only an on and off position, or whether you put it on a blech that is on the gas, sort of an open fire, if you cover the knobs, or if you have an electric hot plate that does have a thermostat where you could go choose different temperatures, if you cover that knob, in all of these cases, you have set that hot plate or blech or warmer to a Shabbat mode. You made the reminder, and then there's no problem of bishul that you might accidentally manipulate the temperature. There's another issue, and that is the perception that I mentioned before, which is called mehze kemevashel, that the person is perceived as if he was cooking, right? And that mehze is not marit ayin. It's not about what other people will think of me, but rather what I would think of what I'm doing. If I think that what I'm doing on Friday or on Shabbat, when I return it to the plate, which we'll talk about, God willing, the next session, if I think that what I'm doing is cooking, and I think it's allowed, I might, God forbid, end up cooking in a way that is forbidden on Shabbat. That is the concern of Mehzek Mevashel. So, for that reason, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, for example, says that using the hot plate on Shabbat is forbidden because Mehzek Mevashel, because you think you're cooking, and he says you must not. It's not optional according to Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. You must cover it with aluminum foil. But the answer to that would be that since it's my perception of what I'm doing, I must ask the question, do I cook like that on a regular basis? Is it something that I do every day? And since the answer is no, the hot plate is in every household. Very few people use it for cooking. Maybe when Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu said it was common. My mother used to, once in a blue moon, leave stuffed peppers or something that would takes 3-4 hours to cook on the hot plate, go to work and come back and it's ready during the week. But this is not very common today. People have crock pots, and talking about crock pots, I just mentioned one last thing that someone asked me, and we'll talk more about hatmana tomorrow. There is no problem with taking the pot out of the crock pot and putting it back on Shabbat. It is not considered hatmana. It's not considered covering because it has to be completely wrapped from all sides. And with the crock pot, the same concept that I mentioned regarding the hot plate exists, and that is that it is fine and actually recommended to put it on a timer. So I hope we enjoy the day. It's a beautiful day out there. It's a little cold, but not cold enough for November. Have a great day. Prepare good food for Shabbat, and we'll meet again tomorrow.